Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia here, and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup. Playoffs Week 1 results. So, the playoffs for the Overwatch League 2019 are finally kicked off, and we have some teams that already find themselves out, and in the rebuilding process for next season. Some teams are storming through the winners bracket, however, not very far away from sealing a place in that grand final in Philadelphia. We have had some really interesting results this week, which remember is only week 1 of these playoffs. As a reminder, the teams that were entering the playoffs were the Vancouver Titans, New York Excelsior, San Francisco Shurk, Hangzhou Spark, LA Gladiators, Atlanta Reign, London Spitfire, and the Seoul Dynasty, the latter two getting into the playoffs through the play-ins which took place in the previous week. But without further delay, let's get into the results for this week. We started off this week with the 8th seed Seoul Dynasty taking on the top seed in the competition, the Vancouver Titans. On paper this looked like a massive mismatch, but the Seoul Dynasty had impressed in the play-ins, getting a rather surprise victory over the informed Guangzhou Charge to find themselves in this position. In the new meta, we did not really know what to expect from the Vancouver Titans, and it was fair to say that they did give us some surprises. The first surprise we had from Vancouver was the fact that they dropped their main tank stalwart Bumper, who had played all season in favour of newcomer Tizzy. Tizzy had been in the Overwatch League before with the previous season's champions, the London Spitfire, but saw no game time before leaving them, so this was a big surprise to many. The Seoul came into this fearing no team though, and it showed. Just like in the play-ins, they had come into this game very well prepared, but this was going to be a much bigger task than what they had faced before. Seoul lose the first match on Lijiang, but this does not dishearten them as they come back to win the next 2 maps quite convincingly, even handing the Titans their first loss on Lombardi since 2017. A map Seoul picked, by the way. What a ballsy move. I have an enormous respect for that. Well done to Seoul. But what are the signs of a great team? Being able to adapt on the fly and change your in-game tactics to suit your opponent. Over the next few maps, Vancouver started to find ways in which to grind out fight wins against a difficult Seoul side. This saw the tide of the match turn. Seoul was starting to run out of ideas, and so Vancouver rallied to take the next 3 maps and close out the series 4-2. Seoul were by no means outplayed in this match though. Unfortunately, Vancouver were just a bit too good for them right now, but with time they can overturn the deficit. This meant that Seoul would go down to the losers bracket and Vancouver would advance to the semi-finals of the winners bracket. On to our next quarter-final in the winners bracket, and this would see the LA Gladiators go up against the Hangzhou Spark. 2 teams that we had not seen yet in this postseason, and so a lot of people were intrigued to see what they would come out with in this new meta. It's fair to say that this one was a cracker. At half-time, it was 1-1, with Hangzhou taking the first control map, showing us some interesting Bastion Symmetra strats, which we will be coming back to later on, but the Gladiators managed to tie things up on King's Row, with neither team finishing the map. After the break, the LA Gladiators would come out fighting with a big-time bank on Temple of Anubis. The Hangzhou Spark were never really going to be able to work that down. This meant the Gladiators now had a 2-1 lead in the series. The Gladiators would extend their lead in the series to 3-1 on Rialto, but the Spark were not going down without a fight. The next 2 maps in this series, on Lijiang Tower and Eichenwald, would go to the Spark, tying us up 3-3 going into our last map of the series on Watchpoint Gibraltar. Ultimately though, LA Gladiators would grind out the win on Gibraltar to take the series 4-3. Although the Spark did lose the series, they were very impressive, and have proved me wrong, as in the preview video I did question their DPS lineup, but they really showed up in this match, especially Bazzi, who is looking fantastic on the Doomfist. This is the first playoff match that the Gladiators have won, and they would proceed to take on the Vancouver Titans in the semi-finals of the winner bracket. On to the next day of fixtures, and we started off with a grudge match between the New York Excelsior and the other team coming in from the play-ins, the London Spitfire. There were a lot of questions coming into this game for the NYXL, as their playoffs record was not the prettiest thing to look at, but their quality is undeniable. The question was, could they finally shake off their demons and get a win over the Spitfire? The NYXL came into this very prepared, and London struggled to find answers for what the Excelsior were throwing at them. We saw a lot of that Symmetra Bastion comp that the Hangzhou Spark used briefly the previous day. London were flummoxed and could not find an answer to the varying comps that the NYXL were bringing out. The reigning champions found themselves 2-0 down at half-time and they needed to regroup and find an answer. Those answers were not forthcoming, though, as they lost map 3 of this series, leaving them 3-0 down going into Watchpoint Gibraltar. This is where London would finally get on the board, playing the NYXL at their own game, bringing out their own bastion, but going into the rest of the series 3-1 down was always going to be a tough task, and the NYXL struck back on the Spitfire's kryptonite map of Ilios, and they sent them down to the losers bracket, winning the series 4-1. The NYXL were very impressive in this match. They have clearly adapted to the new meta very well, and have some more unique strats that they can employ to catch their opponents off guard. London, however, looked like they were struggling for ideas, and with Birdring missing in action, they would need to find some answers before their next game, which would be make or break for their chances of defending their championship. The question is, who would be facing the NYXL? Who would be facing the London Spitfire? Our last quarterfinal would decide. This was between the in-form Atlanta Reign and the early favourites, the San Francisco Shock. This was another cracker of a game. Neither team would be able to win 2 maps in a row. Honestly, it couldn't have been closer. Atlanta would start us off with a 2-1 win on Busan, and so the tennis match begun, with the Shock taking Nimbani in fairly convincing fashion 3-0. As you might guess, Atlanta Reign took the next map, winning Horizon Lunar Colony in fairly dominant fashion again, both teams doing very well on their map picks. Watchpoint Gibraltar would be taken by the Shock, meaning Atlanta would have to take the following control map, 2-0. Map 6 would be King's Row, and was a riot, with both teams showing fantastic form, but it would be the Shock who would take this 6-5 to set up a map 7. We would be going to Rialto, and this one was another very close match. But ultimately, the Atlanta Reign would complete an upset and take the map 3-2, and with that the series 4-3, knocking the early favourites, the San Francisco Shock, down to the losers bracket. This meant that the Shock would face the Spitfire in the losers bracket, while the Atlanta Reign would proceed to the winners bracket semi-final and take on the New York Excelsior. On to the Sunday and the games that I had to catch up on because they were at a ridiculous time in the morning. Thank you, Al. Yes, it was time to kick off the losers bracket. For these teams it was make or break, win or go home, and kicking us off it would be the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Hangzhou Spark. Both of these teams looked very good despite losing their first games to the Vancouver Titans and the LA Gladiators respectively. Hangzhou would kick things off with a 2-0 win on Busan, again Bazzi giving us a masterclass on the Doomfist. Seoul would fight back to even things up 1-1 on Icon World going into the break. A trend that seems to be developing for the Hangzhou Spark is that they tend to be better on defense than they do attack, and this was seen on Temple of Anubis where they failed to get point B, but held the Dynasty in a better defensive round to take the win and go up 2-1 in the series. The game was still very close though, with only fine margins giving Hangzhou the lead. We would then be going to Dorado for map 4. This is where things start to go astray for Seoul Dynasty. On Seoul's map pick, Hangzhou would finish their attack round with 3 minutes in the time bank. That's a massive time bank for a map like Dorado. In the end, Seoul would fail to take the third point and Hangzhou would go up 3-1 in the series, and on to match point going into control and Lijiang Tower. Hangzhou Spark would dominate Lijiang Tower, with Seoul unable to pick up any percentage on either of the points. This means that the Hangzhou Spark would win the series 4-1 and send the Seoul Dynasty home. There was a pretty heartbreaking interview with Ru Jae-hong and Toby after the match with them in tears. It really shows how much it means to these players, and after the match, there was some pretty downhearted tweets from Ru Jae-hong, which is horrible to see. He is a fantastic player and has been an integral part of the Overwatch community since its launch, and it's unfortunate to see someone so heartbroken. This raises questions as to whether we will see Ru Jae-hong in the Overwatch League next season. I certainly hope we will, as it would be heartbreaking for a lot of people to see such an icon of the Overwatch scene retire, but only time will tell. Moving on from that, next up it would be time for the London Spitfire to take the stage once more against the San Francisco Shock. One would be going home and the other would be moving on to the semi-final of the losers bracket. Spitfire seemed in complete control of the first map, as both first and second points of Busan were 99-0 for the Spitfire, but they only managed to actually capture the first point. The clutch was missing from the Spitfire once more, How many times have we said that this season? The Shock get the clutch on the second point, and so it was down to the third point of Busan. This was really close, but the quality and ability to clutch seals the map for the Shock despite the difficult start for them. 1-0 going into Numbani, and again Spitfire almost hold the Shock, but lose the point at the last moment. This is the tale of Spitfire's defense on Numbani. They come very close to holding at each point, but ultimately the Shock ended up finishing the map with about 10 seconds remaining. The end product, again missing for the Spitfire. They just can't clutch out the final fights. On their attack round, London find themselves lacking again, and despite picking up 2 checkpoints, they are held before taking point C, putting the Shock 2-0 up at the break. We go to Horizon Lunar Colony for our third map, and yet again it is the Spitfire who look lacking, as they struggle to take the first point, and don't get any progress on the second point. The Shock absolutely obliterate the Spitfire on their attack run, taking the first point very quickly, and finish the map with a little bit under 5 minutes to spare. The Spitfire just couldn't handle the Shock at this point. The Shock find themselves 3-0 up, and on match point looking to completely sweep the Spitfire aside and dump our reigning champions out of the playoffs in convincing fashion. We go to Watchpoint Gibraltar for our fourth map, and the Shock make a lot of changes. 3 subs bringing in Architect, Super and Nevix for the outgoing Sinatra, your league MVP by the way, Smurf and Choi Hyobin. Spitfire managed to stop the Shock from completing the map, therefore giving themselves a goal to reach to try and prevent the 4-0 sweep. But the Shock put up a strong defense, holding the Spitfire before point B and eliminating the 2018 champions from the playoffs, with the Spitfire unable to put a win on the board. I certainly didn't expect to see a 4-0 in these playoffs, and it is disappointing in some respects. We know London can put on a great show, but this just wasn't it, Chief. They were lacking in every crucial fight. The question I've been asking of the Spitfire in these playoffs is, what has happened to Birdring? He showed us some very good play in the play-ins against the Shanghai Dragons, but has not had any time on stage in these playoffs. Instead, we have seen Guard, and although Guard hasn't looked terrible, I wonder whether the coordination suffered because of the roster change. It would be nice to have some sort of explanation. Whether Birdring is injured or not well, he just seemed to disappear at the most crucial time in London's season. There is work to do for the Spitfire and Cloud9, especially in terms of the backroom in the off-season if they are to improve for next season. The Shock, however, will advance in the losers bracket to take on the losers of our next game. We go back to the winners bracket now, with the semi-finals taking place to round off this week. The first semi-final would be the LA Gladiators taking on the Vancouver Titans. Both teams didn't have it easy in their first games, with the Titans knocking out a battling Seoul Dynasty side, and the Gladiators getting a narrow victory over the confident Hangzhou Spark. This match had some great Overwatch on show, as these two teams had really stepped it up a gear in these playoffs. It would be the Titans taking the first map on Busan, but the Gladiators would hit back immediately, getting a fairly dominant 3-1 victory on King's Row. At the break it was 1-1, and it was all still to play for. We went to Temple of Anubis for our third map, and this one was fairly close once again, with both teams finishing their attack rounds, but in the end the Titans were able to see out a 3-2 win on that map, and the Gladiators would have to find an answer to being behind again. They have that answer ready to go as we go to the Rialto. Gladiators finished their attack round, but it was far from over, as we know that Titans can set a blistering time on that map if they need to. This time it was not to be for the Titans though, as they do finish their attack round by getting all 3 points, but they come up short on the second round, and the Gladiators win the map 4-3, tying up things in the series once more. One trend I have been seeing with some of these top teams though is that as the series goes on, some teams cannot maintain the pace of the game, with fatigue playing a part, I think. I think that was the case with the Dynasty versus the Titans game, and I think it was evident here again. The Gladiators were starting to run out of steam, and it showed, as the next 2 maps on Lijiang Tower and Iconwald narrowly went the way of the Titans, allowing them to seal out a 4-2 victory over the Gladiators. It was a very close match though, and the Gladiators have nothing to be ashamed of, but one thing is for certain. The Vancouver Titans have really showed up at these playoffs, and they will proceed to the winners bracket final. The Gladiators now go down to the losers bracket and will return to action next week in a difficult game against the San Francisco Shock. Now we move on to our last game of the week, which would be the Atlanta Reign taking on the New York Excelsior. Atlanta Reign were coming into this off the back of a shock win over San Francisco. I really need to find a better word than shock when it comes to upsets in this league. Damn it, San Francisco. New York were coming into this off the back of a very good performance against the London Spitfire. The first two maps would go the way of the Excelsior, although they were very close, with Hangzhou going all the way, with New York eventually winning at 5-4. After the break, the Atlanta Reign would answer back, taking Hanamura 2-1, and showing that they would not be going down without a fight. On to map 4, which would be Rialto. Neither team would be finishing this map, as it was very close again, but this time it would be the New York Excelsior who would pick up the win 2-1 and push themselves to match point and 3-1 in the series. Again though, the Reign were not going to go down without a fight, as they took the Excelsior to Lijiang Tower, a map which the Reign would win 2-0 to keep themselves in the series. The problem was, the map pick would now be New York's, and they would take it to Nambani, a map which they had seen much success on during these playoffs. New York's good form on this map showed as they prevent the Atlanta Reign from finishing the map, and they get the win 3-2, taking the series 4-2. The Atlanta Reign should be proud of their performance, as they were definitely not outclassed, as is the case for many teams at the moment, but it was a similar problem to what the London Spitfire ran into. They just don't know how to deal with what the New York Excelsior roll out when they put Seoul on the Bastion. Both teams New York have played in these playoffs have struggled to deal with that comp, so it'll be interesting to see what the Vancouver Titans do when they come up against it, as this will be our winners bracket final next week. However, the Atlanta Reign are certainly not out of it, as they drop down to the losers bracket and set up a match between them and the Hangzhou Spark, so that one should be quite interesting to watch next week. So that's it for this week. Both of our lowest seed teams that came through the play-ins are now out of the running, which to me was somewhat of a surprise, as I thought that Seoul would have a good chance of picking up a win in the losers bracket if they couldn't beat the Titans, and the London Spitfire were ultimately very disappointing, with many questions being asked about their backroom staff and the problem of the missing in action bird ring. As for the teams that have impressed, most teams have stepped it up, but for me it is the Hangzhou Spark who've impressed, as I had a lot of questions regarding their DPS players, but Bazzi especially has really made waves on that Doomfist. I thought coming into this that the Spark would be one of the weaker, if not weakest teams in it, considering some struggles they had in Stage 4, but they have proved me wrong and look like they could be a bit of a dark horse. Atlanta have also impressed, but we kind of expected this considering their form in Stage 4. Also, the Vancouver Titans have stepped it up and not struggled early on as I thought they might. However, my favourites right now would be the New York Excelsior. They look to have finally clicked in a playoffs environment, and I think they look capable of beating the Shock and the Titans right now, but we will find out for sure next week. So that is it for now. I know this one's been a bit longer than usual, but there has been a lot to talk about. I will be back for the preview of next week's fixtures as things really start to hot up, as we will be losing another 4 teams to find out who will be going to the grand final of September the 29th. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you in the next video. See you then.